I can see how both commissions played important roles in shaping India's education system. Moving on to more recent times, I've also been reading about the National Education Policy, NEP, 2020. It seems like a big deal. Can you explain what it's all about?
Absolutely. The NEP 2020 is a landmark policy and the first major education policy of the 21st century in India. It's built on the foundational pillars of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability. The policy aims to make India's education system more inclusive, flexible, and aligned with global standards. It's also closely aligned with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development.
That sounds ambitious. What are some of the key highlights of the NEP 2020?
There are several key aspects to the NEP 2020. One major focus is on vocational education. The policy proposes a National Higher Education Qualification Framework (NHICF), which will be aligned with the National Skill Qualification Framework (NSQF) to integrate vocational education into mainstream higher education. This will help bridge the gap between education and employment by making vocational training a part of the higher education curriculum.
That's a smart move, especially for improving employability. What about higher education in general? How does the NEP 2020 address that?
The NEP 2020 has several transformative goals for higher education. One of the primary aims is to increase the gross enrollment ratio (GER) in higher education from 26.3% in 2018 to 50% by 2035. This is a significant target that aims to make higher education more accessible to a larger population.
By 2040, the policy envisions all higher education institutions becoming multidisciplinary institutions, meaning they will offer a broad range of subjects and not be limited to specific fields of study. This approach promotes a more holistic form of education, encouraging creativity and critical thinking across disciplines.
That's great. A multidisciplinary approach sounds like it will create more well-rounded graduates. I also read about the formation of a new body called the Higher Education Commission of India (HEC). What's its role?
The Higher Education Commission of India (HEC) is envisioned as an overarching body for higher education in India, except for medical and legal education. It will have 4 verticals, each with a specific focus. 1. National Higher Education Regulatory Council (NHERC). This will be the first vertical and will act as the primary regulator for higher education, setting standards and ensuring compliance. 2. National Accreditation Council (NAC). The second vertical, NAC, will be a meta-accrediting body responsible for overseeing the accreditation process to ensure quality standards are maintained across institutions. 3. Higher Education Grants Council (HEC). The third vertical, HEC, will manage funding and financing for higher education based on transparent and merit-based criteria. 4. General Education Council (GEC). The fourth vertical, GEC, will frame expected learning outcomes for higher education programs, referred to as graduate attributes. It's also designed to ensure consistency in the quality of education provided across institutions.
That's quite a comprehensive structure. It seems like the HEC will streamline the regulation and oversight of higher education. What about flexibility for students? Does the NEP 2020 address that?
Yes, flexibility is a key feature of the NEP 2020. One of the most innovative aspects is the Multiple Entry and Exit System (MEES). This system allows students to enter and exit their programs at different stages with a relevant certificate, diploma, or degree, depending on the credits they've earned. For example, a student can leave a bachelor's program after 1 year with a certificate, after 2 years with a diploma, or after 3 or 4 years with a full degree. They can also re-enter the program or a different one at a later time.
That's fantastic. It really accommodates the diverse needs of students and gives them the flexibility to learn at their own pace. It seems like NEP 2020 is a huge step forward in modernizing India's education system.
Definitely. The NEP 2020 aims to make education more accessible, inclusive, and aligned with global standards. It's a forward-looking policy that addresses the needs of the 21st century while also staying true to the core values of education in India.
I've been going through some multiple-choice questions related to higher education in India, and I came across some interesting facts. Can we go over them together?
Of course. I'd be happy to help. What's the first question you have?
The first question is about the Indian Constitution. It asks which entry deals with the coordination and determination of standards in institutions for higher education or research or scientific and technical institutions. The options were Entry 63, Entry 64, Entry 65, and Entry 66. The answer is Entry 66. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Entry 66 of the Union List in the 7th Schedule of the Indian Constitution gives the central government the power to coordinate and determine standards in institutions for higher education, research, and scientific and technical institutions. This means that the central government has the authority to set and maintain educational standards across the country, which helps ensure a uniform level of education and research quality.
That makes sense. The next question was about which national body the Supreme Court directed to frame and prescribe a course in environmental education. The options were UG, NCT, NCERT, ANACT, and the answer is UG. Why did the Supreme Court choose the UG?
The Supreme Court chose the University Grants Commission, UC, because it is the main regulatory body responsible for maintaining standards of higher education in India. The UC was directed to create a compulsory 6-module course on environmental studies for all undergraduate degree programs to ensure that students across disciplines receive education on environmental issues, which is increasingly important in today's world.
That's great. It shows how the UC is involved in various aspects of higher education. Speaking of the UC, there was another question about its responsibilities. It asked which among promoting research, coordination of university standards, increasing access, dispersing grants, and serving as a link between governments were the UC's main functions. The correct answer was coordination, dispersing grants, and serving as a link. Can you elaborate on this?
Absolutely. The UC's primary roles include coordination, determination, and maintenance of standards of university education. This is to ensure that education across universities in India meets certain quality standards. Disbursing grants. The UC provides financial support to universities and colleges, helping them improve their infrastructure and resources. Serving as a link between the union and state governments and institutions of higher learning, the UC helps coordinate educational policies and standards between the central and state governments, ensuring a cohesive approach to higher education. While promoting research and increasing access to education are important goals, they are not specifically the UC's mandated responsibilities.
That clarifies a lot. The next question was about the location of the first national sports university in India. The answer was Manipur. I didn't know India had a national sports university.
Yes, it's quite a unique institution. The National Sports University is the first of its kind in India, located in Manipur. It was established to focus on sports education, providing training and education in various sports and related fields. This university aims to develop skilled sports professionals and promote sports as a significant aspect of education and career in India.
That's awesome. Moving on, another question asked about the current expenditure on research and innovation in India as a percentage of GDP. The correct answer is 0.69%. Is that considered low?
Yes, it is relatively low. At present, India spends about 0.69% of its GDP on research and development (R&D). In comparison, developed countries like the United States, Sweden, and Switzerland spend significantly more, around 2.9%, 3.2%, and 3.4%, respectively. Increasing investment in R&D is crucial for fostering innovation and advancing technology, which in turn can drive economic growth.
That's quite a difference. The next question was about what the UC does not do. The options included regulating quality, maintaining discipline on campuses, funding research projects, and suggesting model curricula. The answer was maintaining discipline on campuses. Why is that not a responsibility of the UC?
The UC is responsible for regulating the quality of higher education, funding research projects, and suggesting model curricula to universities. However, maintaining discipline on campuses is not within its mandate. Discipline and campus management are usually handled by the institutions themselves, often guided by their internal policies and regulations. The UK's role is more focused on the academic and financial aspects of higher education rather than day-to-day management.
That makes sense. It's up to the institutions to maintain their campus environment. The next question asked about how the central government's expenditure on general higher education is routed in India. The answer was through the UK. Is that typical for most of the funding?
Yes, most of the central government's expenditure on general higher education is indeed routed through the UK. The UK is tasked with allocating funds to universities and colleges across India to support their development and ensure they meet certain educational standards. This centralized funding mechanism helps maintain consistency and fairness in financial support to higher education institutions.
Got it. I also found a question about who described the Education Dispatch of 1854 as the Magna Carta of Indian education in his work, A History of Missions in India. The answer was J. Richter. Why is the Education Dispatch of 1854 so important?
The Education Dispatch of 1854, often referred to as the Magna Carta of Indian education, laid the foundation for the modern educational system in India during British rule. It introduced significant reforms, such as establishing universities in major cities like Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras, promoting vernacular languages in primary education, and expanding access to education across different social classes. J. Richter highlighted its importance in his book because it marked the beginning of formal and structured education in India, which has influenced the education system to this day.
That's fascinating. Another question was about who diverted young Indians from Western education to Oriental education during British rule. The answer was Annie Besant. How did she influence education?
Annie Besant was a prominent theosophist and nationalist who strongly advocated for Indian culture and spirituality. During British rule, she established schools and promoted educational reforms that focused on Indian knowledge systems and culture, steering young Indians towards Oriental education. Besant emphasized the value of India's ancient traditions and teachings, which helped foster a sense of pride and identity among Indians during the colonial period.
She must have been quite influential. The next question was about the recommendation that no student should specialize in teaching a subject unless they had it in their undergraduate degree. The answer was the Education Commission of 1964 to 66. What was the significance of this recommendation?
The Education Commission of 1964 to 66, also known as the Kothari Commission, made this recommendation to ensure that teachers have a deep and thorough understanding of the subjects they teach. By requiring students to specialize in subjects they had studied during their undergraduate degrees, the Commission aimed to enhance the quality of teaching and ensure that educators were well equipped to provide comprehensive education in their fields.
That makes a lot of sense, ensuring quality education from knowledgeable teachers. There was also a question about who chaired the University Education Commission in 1948, and the answer was Dr. S. Radhakrishnan. Why was this commission important?
The University Education Commission of 1948, chaired by Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, was important because it was the first education commission set up after India's independence. The commission made significant recommendations to reform higher education in India, emphasizing the need for universities to contribute to nation building and social development. It led to the establishment of the UK and helped lay the groundwork for modernizing and improving the quality of higher education in India.
That's really interesting. Lastly, there was a question about which international organization initially supported ANU's hosting of the SAARC Consortium on Open and Distance Learning and the Global Mega Universities Network. The answer was UNESCO. Why did UNESCO support these initiatives?
UNESCO supported these initiatives because it aligns with their mission to promote international collaboration in education, science, and culture. The SAARC Consortium on Open and Distance Learning, SACRDILE, and the Global Mega Universities Network, GMANet, focus on enhancing access to education through open and distance learning, which is crucial for expanding educational opportunities to diverse populations. By supporting these networks, UNESCO helps improve the quality and accessibility of education globally.
That's wonderful. Open and distance learning can make such a difference in education accessibility. Thank you so much for going over these questions with me. I've learned a lot.
I've been reading about the history of education in ancient India, and it's quite fascinating. I learned that education back then had a unique system and approach. Could we discuss this in detail?
Absolutely. The history of education in ancient India is indeed rich and varied. It dates back to around the 3rd century BC, and education during this time was heavily influenced by religious training and traditional knowledge. Sages and scholars often imparted education orally, and for written records, they used palm leaves and tree barks.
Wow, that's interesting. I read that there were both formal and informal education systems back then. Can you explain how these systems worked?
Sure. In ancient India, the education system was quite diverse and included both formal and informal methods. Indigenous education was imparted in various settings such as homes, temples, pathshalas, local schools, tolls, small schools run by Brahmin scholars, chatuspadhyas, another form of a local school, and gurukuls, residential schools where students lived with their guru. In these environments, young children were guided in imbibing pious ways of life. Temples served as centers of learning and played a crucial role in promoting knowledge, especially in rural areas. For higher education, students went to viharas, Buddhist monasteries, and universities, which were quite advanced for their time.
It's amazing how they had such a structured system even back then. I also came across the term Gurukula. What was the Gurukula system all about?
The Gurukula system was the most prominent form of education in ancient India. These were essentially residential schools where Sishyas, students, lived with the guru, teacher, in the same house or nearby. The key aspect of the Gurukula system was that students lived together irrespective of their social standing, which fostered a sense of community and equality among the learners. The students were taught various subjects, including Vedas, and they followed a strict discipline under the guidance of their guru.
That sounds like a very immersive learning environment. What about the curriculum? What did the students learn in these ancient institutions?
The curriculum during the Vedic era was quite comprehensive and was primarily centered around the Vedas. The Vedas are considered the oldest literature in the world and are regarded as the original sources of the philosophy of life in ancient India. There are 4 Vedas: Rigveda, Samveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. These texts formed the foundation of Indian culture and philosophy, and their study provided students with a deep understanding of life and spirituality.
So, the Vedas were the core of their education. How was this knowledge imparted to the students?
The knowledge was imparted through 2 main methods: oral and Chintan, thinking or contemplation. The guru would recite the Vedic hymns with regulated and prescribed pronunciation, which the students would commit to memory by listening repeatedly. This oral tradition was essential for preserving the knowledge, as the texts were often transmitted verbally from one generation to the next.
That's quite different from how we learn today. I also read about the Upanayana ceremony. What was its significance in the Vedic education system?
The Upanayana ceremony was a formal initiation that marked the beginning of a student's education under the guidance of a guru. This ceremony symbolized the student leaving the home of their natural parents and entering the home of their preceptor, where they would live and learn. It was an important rite of passage that signified the start of the student's educational journey.
It sounds like a very sacred and significant event. Were there any specific rules or disciplines that the students had to follow in these institutions?
Yes, there were several rules, one of the most important being the discipline of brahmacharya or celibacy. This was compulsory for all students, and it emphasized the importance of self-control and focus on education. Although a married youth could receive education, they were not allowed to be residential pupils. This ensured that students living in the Gurukula could dedicate themselves fully to their studies without distractions.
That's quite strict. Were there other types of educational institutions besides the Gurukulas?
Definitely. In addition to Gurukulas, there were Parishads, academies, and sammelans, conferences that served as important educational institutions. Parishads were scholarly gatherings or assemblies where learned individuals would discuss and debate various subjects, often related to philosophy, science, and religion. Sammelans, on the other hand, were more like conferences where scholars would come together to share their knowledge and research.
It's fascinating to see how well organized and diverse the education system was in ancient India. They had different platforms for learning, debate, and discussion.
Absolutely. The education system in ancient India was deeply rooted in the country's philosophical and epistemological traditions. It wasn't just about learning academic subjects. It was also about understanding life, spirituality, and moral values. This holistic approach to education aimed to develop a person's character and wisdom, making them well-rounded individuals.
I really appreciate this holistic approach. It seems like education was about more than just acquiring knowledge. It was about shaping the whole person. Thank you so much for explaining all this. It's been enlightening.
I've been reading about education during the Sutras and Epics period and the Buddhist era in India. There is so much to learn. Can we discuss these topics?
Absolutely. The evolution of education from the Vedic period to the Sutra and Buddhist periods is quite fascinating. Let's start with the education during the Sutra period. This period came after the Vedic literature, roughly between 600 BC and 200 BC. The Vedic literature had grown vast and complex, so there was a need to simplify and organize it, which led to the development of the sutras.
Interesting. So, what exactly were these sutras, and how did they influence education?
The sutras were concise texts that summarized the vast body of Vedic literature into easily understandable and manageable rules and regulations. During this period, education was influenced heavily by the Dharma Sutras, which laid down the principles of social conduct and codes of duties for both teachers and students. These texts were foundational in shaping the ethical and moral aspects of education during that time.
That makes sense. It seems like education was very much tied to moral and social conduct. What about the Buddhist era? I know it was a significant period for education as well.
The Buddhist era was indeed crucial for the development of education in ancient India. The primary aim of education during this period was the purity of character. Much like the Vedic system, Buddhist education also emphasized character building over intellectual or psychological development. The education aimed not only to impart knowledge, but also to propagate Buddhism. This was often achieved through tours and travels, where students were encouraged to apply their theoretical knowledge in real-life situations.
That's quite a practical approach to education. I also read that there were monthly assemblies during the Buddhist period. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, these assemblies were an integral part of Buddhist education. Learned people would gather at the beginning, Pratipada, and close, Purnima, of each month to discuss various topics. These gatherings were not just social events. They were crucial for intellectual exchange and learning. Such assemblies helped in the continuous education of monks and nuns, and were central to the spread of Buddhist teachings.
That sounds like a great way to facilitate continuous learning and dialogue. I also read that higher education during the Buddhist period included a variety of subjects. What were some of these subjects?
In the Buddhist period, higher education was quite diverse. It included religion, philosophy, military science, medicine, and other advanced subjects. Interestingly, even though the focus was primarily on Buddhist studies, the Vedas were also studied for comparative knowledge. However, the Atharvaveda was typically not included in the curriculum up to the Jataka period.
It's fascinating how they included a broad range of subjects. I also learned that many monasteries and viharas were established during this time. What role did they play in education?
Monasteries and viharas were central to Buddhist education. They were not only places for meditation and worship but also for debate, discussion, and learning. Around these viharas, numerous educational centers of higher learning developed, attracting students from far and wide, including countries like China, Korea, Tibet, Burma, Ceylon, Java, Nepal, and others. These centers became vibrant hubs of knowledge exchange and learning.
That explains why so many foreign students came to India during that period. Among these centers, Takshashila seems to stand out. What made it so significant?
Takshashila, or Taxila, was one of the most notable centers of learning in ancient India. It was an early Buddhist center of education that attracted students from all over the world until its destruction in the 5th century CE. Located in what is now northwestern Pakistan, Takshashila was famous for its diverse curriculum that included Buddhist teachings, philosophy, medicine, and even political science. It is also considered one of the oldest universities in the world and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980.
Wow, I didn't realize it was such a significant educational hub. I also read about Nalanda. It seems like it was another important center. Can you tell me more about it?
Nalanda was indeed a prominent center of learning, situated in modern-day Bihar, India. Established in the 5th century CE, it was a major cultural and educational hub dedicated to Buddhist studies. However, it also taught fine arts, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, politics, and the art of war. Nalanda had a unique setup with a 9-story library and dormitories that could house around 10,000 students and 2,000 professors.
That's incredible. A 9-story library sounds massive. How competitive was it to get into Nalanda?
It was quite competitive. The admittance examination at Nalanda was tough, with only about 20% of the applicants passing, according to the Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who studied and taught there in the 7th century CE. The minimum age for admission was 20, and the university provided education, board, and lodging free of cost. Unfortunately, Nalanda's glorious run as a center of learning came to an end in the 12th century when it was destroyed by the invading forces of Bakshar Khilji.
That's so tragic, especially considering its importance. Were there other significant educational centers during this time?
Yes, there were several other important centers of learning. Vallabhi in western India was another major educational hub, known for its training in secular subjects. It was considered as prestigious as Nalanda and attracted students from across India. Then there was Vikramshala, founded by Emperor Dharampala in the 8th century. It was famous for its focus on subjects like logic, philosophy, and Tantra Shastra. Like Nalanda, Vikramshala was also destroyed by Bakshar Khilji in 1203 AD.
It seems like these centers were not just about religious education, but also covered a broad range of subjects. What about Mithila and Adantapuri?
Mithila, also known as Videha, became a significant center for Brahmanical education during the Upanishadic age. It was famous for its focus on Nyaya, jurisprudence, and Tarkashastra, logic. Mithila continued to be an important educational and cultural center up to the Mughal period.
Adantapuri was another educational center founded by Dharmapala of the Pala dynasty in the late 8th century in Magadha. Though it didn't reach the same level of fame as Nalanda or Vikramshala, it was still significant, with about 1,000 monks and students studying there.
It's fascinating to see how diverse and rich the educational landscape was in ancient India. Were there any other notable universities?
Yes, there were a few more. Samapura, also established by Dharmapala, was a major center of learning for Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. It was known for its vast campus and intricate terracotta art that depicted influences from these three traditions.
Another important center was Nadia, also known as Navadweep, in Bengal. After the decline of Nalanda and Vikramshala, Nadia rose to prominence as a major center of Hindu culture and education. It became especially known for its focus on logic and philosophy.
It's amazing how education in ancient India wasn't just about religious teachings, but also included a wide range of secular subjects and practical knowledge. Thanks for explaining all this. I've learned so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad you found it interesting. The history of education in ancient India is indeed vast and diverse. It's always great to explore how these ancient institutions shaped learning and knowledge dissemination, which has influenced educational systems around the world.
I've been reading about how higher education evolved in India after independence, and there were some key commissions and committees that played important roles. Can we go over some of these?
Sure. The evolution of higher learning and research in post-independence India is a fascinating journey. After India gained independence, there was a significant focus on reforming the education system to meet the needs of a newly independent country. One of the first major steps was the establishment of the Radhakrishnan Commission in 1948-49, also known as the University Education Commission.
Right, I remember reading about the Radhakrishnan Commission. What were its main objectives?
The Radhakrishnan Commission was appointed to study the state of university education in India and to suggest improvements to better suit the country's needs, both present and future. The commission focused on several areas, but one of its major recommendations was regarding the medium of instruction at the university level. It also recommended the establishment of a University Grants Commission (UC), modeled after the University Grants Committee in Great Britain. This recommendation became a reality in 1956 when the UC was established by an act of parliament, which granted it the authority to coordinate and determine standards in higher education and research.
That's significant. The UC has played a major role in shaping higher education in India. What about the Secondary Education Commission, also known as the Madaliyar Commission?
The Secondary Education Commission, or Madaliyar Commission, was established in 1952 under the chairmanship of Dr. A. Lakshmanaswamy Madaliyar, who was the Vice-Chancellor of Madrasa University. This commission was tasked with examining the existing secondary education system and suggesting measures for its reorganization and improvement. It aimed to align secondary education more closely with primary and higher education, ensuring a smoother transition for students as they advanced in their studies.
So, the Madaliyar Commission was focused more on secondary education. And then there was the Kothari Commission in 1964, right?
Exactly. The Kothari Commission was another pivotal commission set up by the Government of India in 1964. It was led by Dr. D.S. Kothari, the then chairman of the UC, and consisted of 17 members, including prominent educationists from India and abroad. The Kothari Commission's report, submitted in 1966, is a comprehensive document that laid out extensive recommendations for reforming India's education system. It is often referred to as the basis for all subsequent educational reforms in India.
I've heard that the Kothari Commission's report was quite extensive. What were some of its key recommendations?
The report, which is about 700 pages long, covered a wide range of issues related to education. Some key recommendations included the development of a national system of education, the integration of vocational and general education, and the emphasis on science and technology. The Commission also recommended the promotion of equity and social justice in education, ensuring that educational opportunities are available to all sections of society.
That's impressive. It seems like the Kothari Commission had a broad vision for the future of education in India. I also read about the Ramamurthy Review Committee. What was its role?
The Ramamurthy Review Committee was formed in 1990 to review the National Policy on Education of 1986. Chaired by Acharya Ramamurthy, the committee aimed to evaluate the policy and recommend revisions to align it with contemporary needs. The committee's report, titled Towards an Enlightened and Humane Society, suggested various changes to the policy and outlined actions for implementing these changes within a set time frame.
It sounds like this committee was focused on updating the education policy to make it more relevant. I also came across different types of learning programs in India, like Oriental, conventional, and non-conventional learning. Can you explain these?
Certainly. Oriental education in India refers to traditional or orthodox forms of learning that focus on ancient scriptures and philosophies. It involves three basic processes: Sravana, acquiring knowledge through listening to the Shrutis; Manana, thinking and analyzing what has been heard; and Nidyasan, comprehending the truth and applying it to real life. There are several institutes dedicated to Oriental learning in India, such as the Adyar Library and Research Center, Asiatic Society, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, and others.
So, Oriental education is more about traditional knowledge and practices. What about conventional teaching?
Conventional teaching is what we typically think of as traditional classroom learning. It involves passive learning, where the teacher sets the pace of instruction, and students listen and follow directions. This method focuses on imparting knowledge, skills, and experience from the teacher to the student. It's a more structured form of learning compared to Oriental education.
I see. And how is non-conventional teaching different from these?
Non-conventional teaching is more about active learning. It allows students to move freely, choose their own work, and learn at their own pace. The role of the teacher in this setup is more of a facilitator rather than a direct instructor. This method emphasizes the general development of students and mastering learning modules through exploration and self-directed learning. It's a more flexible and student-centered approach compared to conventional teaching.
That sounds like a more modern approach to learning, giving students more control over their education. Thanks for explaining all of this. It's fascinating to see how education in India has evolved over time and how various commissions and committees have influenced this evolution.